The marble floors of Richardson Industries gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting the hurried footsteps of executives in $1,000 suits who moved through the towering lobby like sharks in expensive fabric. At exactly 7:47 a.m., the revolving glass doors spun with mechanical precision, ushering in another wave of corporate warriors armed with briefcases and bottomless ambition. None of them noticed the young woman huddled in the far corner near the artificial waterfall, her worn sneakers tucked beneath a plastic chair that had seen better days. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Rodriguez clutched her 6-month-old daughter closer to her chest, the baby's soft whimpers barely audible above the symphony of clicking heels and ringing phones. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the thin blanket draped over little Sofia, trying to create some semblance of privacy in the bustling corporate cathedral. The irony wasn't lost on her that she sat in the shadow of a company worth billions while counting the remaining dollars in her wallet, wondering if she had enough for the bus ride home. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Marcus Richardson stepped into his domain. At 38, he commanded Richardson Industries with the same calculated precision his grandfather had used to build the empire from a single construction company into a multinational conglomerate. His charcoal gray suit was tailored to perfection, each thread positioned with the exactness of a military formation. The Rolex on his wrist caught the morning light as he checked the time, already running through the day's agenda in his mind like a computer processing data. Marcus had learned early that emotions were luxuries he couldn't afford. When his parents died in a car accident 12 years ago, leaving him to inherit the company at 26, he discovered that sentiment was the enemy of success. Board members who had once bounced him on their knees suddenly circled like vultures, waiting for the young heir to stumble. He'd shown them otherwise, growing the company's value by 300% through a combination of ruthless efficiency and strategic coldness that had earned him both respect and fear in equal measure. His personal assistant, Jennifer Walsh, materialized beside him as if summoned by telepathy, her tablet already displaying the morning's priorities. She was a woman in her 40s who had perfected the art of anticipating her boss's needs before he voiced them, a skill that had made her indispensable in the Richardson ecosystem. The Shanghai deal requires your signature by 9, Jennifer said, matching his brisk pace as they moved toward the executive elevator bank. The marketing team wants 15 minutes to discuss the European expansion campaign, and your lunch with Senator Morrison has been moved to 1:30 to accommodate his schedule change. Marcus nodded, his eyes scanning the lobby with the systematic attention of a security camera. He noticed everything the way other people noticed weather, filing details away without conscious thought. The maintenance crew had done their job. Not a single fingerprint marred the surfaces. The security guards stood at their posts with military bearing. The flowers in the massive arrangements were fresh, their colors vibrant against the neutral palette of wealth and power. It was then that his systematic scan caught something that didn't belong in his carefully orchestrated world. In the corner, where most people wouldn't look twice, a young woman sat with what appeared to be a baby. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, with the familiar irritation that came when people violated the unspoken rules of his environment. The lobby wasn't a public waiting room or a place for personal business. It was the face of Richardson Industries, a space designed to intimidate competitors and impress clients, not accommodate random individuals with their personal problems. "Jennifer," he said without breaking stride, "why is there a woman with a baby in our lobby?" Jennifer followed his gaze, her own expression shifting to one of professional concern. "I'm not sure, sir. Security should have addressed any unauthorized persons. Would you like me to handle it? Marcus paused, something unusual stirring in his chest as he watched the woman adjust her position slightly, clearly trying to remain inconspicuous. She couldn't be older than 25, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that spoke of function over fashion. Her clothes were clean but clearly worn, the kind of careful presentation that came from someone who took pride in their appearance despite obvious financial constraints. What struck him most was the gentle way she moved, every gesture calculated to comfort the small bundle in her arms rather than draw attention to herself. "No," he heard himself say, surprising both Jennifer and himself. "I'll handle it personally." Jennifer's eyebrows rose by a millimeter, the most expression she ever allowed herself during business hours. In the 3 years she'd worked for Marcus Richardson, she'd never known him to personally address what should be a security matter. His approach to human problems was typically to delegate them to the appropriate department and move on to more pressing concerns. Marcus found himself walking toward the corner, his polished shoes silent against the marble. As he drew closer, he could see that the woman was indeed breastfeeding, the baby's tiny fist visible against the blanket that provided modest coverage. The sight should have increased his irritation. Anyone could see this wasn't appropriate behavior for a corporate environment, but instead, he felt something unexpected. The woman's face held a mixture of exhaustion and fierce protectiveness that reminded him of photographs he'd seen of refugees, people who had lost everything but refused to surrender their dignity. Maya sensed someone approaching before she saw him. She'd developed the hypervigilant awareness that came from months of living on the edge, where every sound could signal either help or trouble. When she looked up, her breath caught in her throat. The man standing before her radiated the kind of power that made rooms go quiet when he entered them. His presence was magnetic in the way that only came from absolute confidence, the certainty of someone who had never been told no when it mattered. She recognized him immediately, though she'd only seen his photograph in business magazines and news articles. Marcus Richardson, the billionaire CEO whose company employed half the city in one capacity or another. The man whose decisions affected thousands of lives with the casual indifference of someone moving chess pieces on a board. Maya felt her heart rate spike, the familiar panic that came when her two worlds threatened to collide. "Miss," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance, "this is a private corporate lobby, not a public facility. I'm going to have to ask you to move along." Maya's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and something deeper anger at being made to feel ashamed for feeding her daughter. She'd been careful to choose the most discreet corner, to make herself as invisible as possible. Sofia had been fussy all morning, and Maya had desperately needed somewhere clean and safe to nurse her before heading to her job interview across town. The bus had broken down, leaving her stranded downtown with a crying baby and rapidly diminishing options. "I'm sorry," Maya said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I just needed a few minutes. My daughter was hungry and I didn't know where else to go." Something in her tone made Marcus pause. He'd expected defiance or excuses, the typical responses he encountered when confronting people who violated boundaries. Instead, he heard exhaustion and genuine apology, the words of someone who wasn't trying to take advantage but had simply run out of choices. He noticed details he'd missed from a distance, the way her fingers shook slightly as she held the blanket, the dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, the careful way she held herself as if trying to take up as little space as possible. "Where exactly were you planning to go?" Marcus found himself asking, though he couldn't explain why the question mattered to him. Maya hesitated, uncertain whether honesty would help or hurt her situation. "I have a job interview at Fletcher & Associates, the accounting firm about 6 blocks from here. But the bus broke down and I needed to feed Sofia before." She trailed off. realizing how pathetic her explanation sounded to someone who probably flew private jets to lunch meetings. Marcus knew Fletcher and Associates. It was a mid-tier accounting firm that handled small business clients, the kind of place where starting salaries barely covered rent in the city's cheaper neighborhoods. The fact that this woman was interviewing there told him everything about her financial situation and her desperation to improve it. "What kind of position?" he asked, surprising himself again with his continued interest. "Junior bookkeeper," Maya replied, her chin lifting slightly with pride despite her circumstances. "I have an associate degree in accounting from the community college. I know it's not much, but I'm good with numbers and I learn fast." Marcus studied her face as she spoke, noting the intelligence in her dark eyes and the way she articulated her qualifications despite her obvious discomfort. There was something compelling about her determination, the way she maintained her dignity even while asking for basic human courtesy. It reminded him of something he'd forgotten he once possessed before the weight of responsibility had crushed his capacity for spontaneous kindness. The baby stirred in Maya's arms, making small, contented sounds that seemed to echo in the vast lobby. Marcus found himself looking at the child properly for the first time, seeing not an inconvenience or a violation of corporate protocol, but a tiny human being whose needs had no regard for business hours or social conventions. Sofia had her mother's dark hair and what appeared to be an unusually alert expression for an infant, her dark eyes seeming to track the movement and lights around her with curious interest. "How old is she?" Marcus asked, the question emerging, without his conscious permission. 6 months, Maya answered, her voice softening as it always did when she talked about her daughter. "Her name is Sofia. She's usually very quiet, but she gets hungry every few hours, and I couldn't make her wait until after the interview." Marcus felt something crack in the carefully constructed walls he'd built around his emotions. The woman wasn't asking for money or favors or any of the things people usually wanted from him. She was simply trying to care for her child in the most basic way possible, and she'd chosen his lobby because it was clean and safe and public enough to offer protection while private enough to offer discretion. The realization that his corporate palace served as a refuge for a struggling mother struck him as both absurd and profoundly meaningful. "Mrs. Mo," he prompted, realizing he didn't know her name. "Rodriguez, Maya Rodriguez, and it's Miss," she added quietly, the admission carrying a weight of explanation about her circumstances. Marcus nodded, filing the information away with the same precision he used for business details. Maya Rodriguez, single mother, community college education, unemployed but actively seeking work, resourceful enough to find solutions, but humble enough to apologize for her presence. The profile painted a picture of someone fighting to build a life for herself and her child, despite obvious obstacles. "Miss Rodriguez," Marcus said, his tone shifting from authoritative to something approaching conversational. "How long have you been looking for work?" Maya considered lying, presenting a version of her story that might sound less desperate, but something in Marcus Richardson's direct gaze suggested he would see through any deception. 3 months, she admitted, since Sofia was old enough for me to leave her with a babysitter for a few hours. Before that, I was trying to finish my degree online while taking care of her, but the credits were expensive and I had to stop when the money ran out. The simple honesty of her response hit Marcus like a physical force. Here was someone who had made real sacrifices, who had put her education on hold and struggled to find basic employment while caring for an infant. The contrast between her situation and his own life of endless luxury struck him as almost obscene. He spent more on a single dinner than she probably had for groceries in a month. "What happened to your previous employment?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Maya's face tightened almost imperceptibly. I worked at a small insurance office until I was 7 months pregnant. They said the position was being eliminated due to budget cuts, but I think they just didn't want to deal with maternity leave. Small companies don't have to follow the same rules as big corporations. The explanation confirmed Marcus's suspicions about her situation. She'd been pushed out of her job for becoming pregnant, left to navigate single motherhood without income or benefits, probably facing medical bills she couldn't afford and housing insecurity that kept her awake at night. The story was depressingly common, though Marcus rarely encountered it directly in his insulated world of executive privilege. Sofia made a small sound and shifted in her mother's arms, apparently finished nursing and ready to investigate her surroundings. Maya adjusted the blanket and began the practiced routine of repositioning her daughter, movements that spoke of countless repetitions. She was clearly an attentive mother, responding to her child's needs with automatic precision while maintaining awareness of her environment and the conversation with the intimidating man who held her immediate fate in his hands. "Miss Rodriguez," Marcus said, making a decision that surprised him with its spontaneity, "I want to make you an offer." Maya's eyes widened, uncertainty and hope warring in her expression. "An offer? Cancel your interview at Fletcher and Associates," Marcus said, his business mind already calculating possibilities and logistics. "Come work for Richardson Industries instead." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning two completely different worlds. Maya stared at him, her mouth slightly open, clearly struggling to process what she'd just heard. The offer was so unexpected, so far beyond anything she'd dared hope for, that she wondered if she'd misunderstood. "I don't understand," Maya said. Slowly. "Work for you? Doing what? I don't have the qualifications for a position at a company like this." Marcus found himself studying her face, noting the way hope and disbelief battled in her features. She wanted to believe his offer was genuine, but her experience had taught her to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. The combination of vulnerability and caution in her expression stirred something protective in him that he hadn't felt in years. "You have an accounting background," Marcus said, his mind already formulating a plan. "Our accounting department can always use qualified personnel, and your community college education is more relevant experience than half the theoretical knowledge that comes out of expensive universities." Maya shook her head, still struggling to accept what she was hearing. "But you don't know anything about me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You don't know if I'm honest or reliable, or if I can actually do the work. How can you offer me a job based on a 5-minute conversation?" The question demonstrated exactly the kind of critical thinking Marcus valued in his employees. She wasn't jumping at the offer without consideration. She was questioning the logic behind it, showing the same analytical mind that had earned her good grades in her accounting courses. Her skepticism actually increased his confidence in his impulsive decision. "You're right," Marcus acknowledged. "I don't know those things about you yet, but I know you're resourceful enough to find solutions when you're out of options. I know you're responsible enough to prioritize your child's needs, even when it's uncomfortable for you. And I know you're honest enough to admit your limitations rather than oversell your qualifications." Maya felt tears threatening at the edges of her vision, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of her circumstances. An hour ago, she'd been sitting in a corporate lobby, hoping nobody would notice her long enough for her to feed her daughter. Now the owner of that corporation was offering her employment with a casualness that suggested he handed out life-changing opportunities as easily as other people gave directions. "I don't understand why you're doing this," Maya whispered, her voice thick with emotion she was struggling to control. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering how to answer a question he wasn't entirely sure he could answer himself. The truth was that he didn't fully understand his own motivations. Something about Maya Rodriguez had penetrated the emotional armor he'd worn for so long that he'd forgotten it was removable. Maybe it was the fierce protectiveness he'd seen in her eyes when she held her daughter, or the dignity she maintained, despite her obvious struggles, or simply the recognition of someone fighting against circumstances beyond her control. Because sometimes the right person shows up at exactly the moment when you need them most, Marcus said finally, the words emerging from some deep place he'd kept locked away for years. And sometimes it takes seeing someone else's courage to remember what your own looks like. Maya stared at him, seeing something in his expression that hadn't been there before. For just a moment, the mask of corporate authority slipped, and she glimpsed the man underneath the billion-dollar empire. There was something lonely in his eyes, a recognition that wealth and power couldn't fill every empty space in a person's life. What would the job entail? Maya asked, forcing herself to approach this practically despite the emotional earthquake happening in her chest. Junior accountant position to start, Marcus replied, slipping back into business mode with visible relief. You'd be working with our corporate accounting team, handling accounts receivable, basic financial reporting, data entry. Starting salary would be $45,000 annually, plus full benefits including health insurance and childcare assistance. The numbers hit Maya like a physical blow. $45,000 was more than she'd ever imagined earning, certainly more than the $28,000 Fletcher and Associates had been offering for their bookkeeper position. The health insurance alone would transform her life, eliminating the constant terror of what would happen if Sofia got sick and needed medical care Maya couldn't afford. Childcare assistance? Maya repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Richardson Industries provides on-site childcare for employees, Marcus explained. It's actually one of our most popular benefits. Sofia would be well cared for while you work, and you'd be able to see her during lunch breaks. The offer was so comprehensive, so perfectly tailored to her exact needs, that Maya wondered if she was dreaming. She'd spent months applying for positions that would barely cover her rent, accepting the reality that she'd have to leave Sofia with the cheapest babysitter she could find and hope nothing went wrong. The idea that she could work at a job that paid well while keeping her daughter close seemed like something from another universe. When would you need an answer? Maya asked, still trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. You already know what your answer is, Marcus said, a slight smile touching the corners of his mouth for the first time since their conversation began. The question is whether you're brave enough to take the risk. Maya looked down at Sofia, who had fallen asleep in her arms with the peaceful confidence of a child who trusted completely in her mother's ability to keep her safe. Everything Maya had done for the past 6 months had been for Sofia, every sacrifice and struggle motivated by the determination to give her daughter a better life than the one Maya had known growing up. This opportunity represented everything she'd been fighting for, handed to her by a man who had no reason to care about her struggles, but had chosen to help anyway. Yes, Maya said, her voice steady and clear. Yes, I'll take the job. Marcus nodded, feeling a satisfaction that was different from the triumph he usually experienced when closing business deals. This wasn't about profit margins or market share, it was about something more fundamental. For the first time in years, he'd made a decision based purely on human instinct rather than calculated advantage, and the result felt more meaningful than any financial victory he'd achieved. Excellent, Marcus said, his professional demeanor returning as he began mentally organizing the logistics of his impulsive hire. Jennifer will handle the paperwork and orientation details. Can you start Monday? Monday, Maya repeated, the E word carrying the weight of a new beginning. Yes, absolutely. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to Maya. This is Jennifer's direct number. Call her this afternoon and she'll coordinate everything you need to know. And Miss Rodriguez. Yes? Welcome to Richardson Industries. As Marcus walked away, Maya remained seated for several minutes, holding his business card like a talisman and trying to convince herself that the conversation had actually happened. Sofia stirred in her arms, opening her dark eyes and looking around with the alert curiosity that never failed to amaze Maya. Her daughter would grow up in a different world than the one Maya had planned for her just an hour earlier, with opportunities and security that had seemed impossibly distant when Maya had walked into the lobby that morning. The transformation felt too swift, too dramatic to be real. Maya had spent months carefully managing her expectations, applying for positions she was overqualified for, and accepting that she'd have to work her way up slowly from whatever entry-level job she could find. The idea that she could skip years of struggle through a single encounter with a stranger seemed to violate every lesson her life had taught her about how opportunities actually worked. But the business card in her hand was real, and the memory of Marcus Richardson's unexpected kindness was too vivid to be imagination. Something had happened in those few minutes of conversation, some recognition between two people whose lives couldn't have been more different, but who had found common ground in the most unlikely circumstances. Maya carefully tucked the business card into her wallet next to the few remaining bills and Sofia's insurance card. Then she gathered her belongings, lifted her daughter, and walked toward the massive glass doors that would take her back into a world that looked exactly the same as when she'd entered, but felt completely transformed by possibility. Behind her, Marcus Richardson stepped into his private elevator, his mind already working through the practical implications of his spontaneous decision. He'd need to coordinate with human resources, arrange for the childcare enrollment, and prepare his staff for the arrival of their newest team member. But beneath the familiar rhythm of business planning, something else was stirring. For the first time in years, Marcus felt connected to the human impact of his decisions rather than just their financial outcomes. The elevator carried him toward his executive suite, but his thoughts remained in the lobby with a young mother who had trusted him enough to accept an offer that must have seemed too good to be true. Maya Rodriguez didn't know it yet, but she had just changed both their lives in ways that neither of them could have predicted when she'd sat down to nurse her daughter in the corner of his corporate kingdom. As the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, Marcus Richardson walked into his day with the unfamiliar sensation of having done something that mattered not because it was profitable or strategic, but simply because it was right. The feeling was both foreign and oddly familiar, like remembering a language he'd once spoken fluently but had forgotten he knew. In the lobby below, the marble floors continued to gleam under the fluorescent lights, and the artificial waterfall continued its endless cycle, but something fundamental had shifted in the space between then and now, a reminder that even in the most carefully controlled environments, human connection could still emerge with the power to transform everything it touched. Maya's hands trembled as she adjusted Sofia's car seat in the back of the rideshare vehicle Monday morning, the leather interior a stark reminder of how far her world had shifted in just 3 days. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, had insisted on helping her with the diaper bag and stroller, commenting that his own daughter was about Sofia's age. The normalcy of his conversation felt surreal against the backdrop of her destination, the towering glass monument where she would begin a job that still seemed too impossible to be real. She'd spent the weekend in a state of controlled panic, researching Richardson Industries until her eyes burned from staring at her cracked laptop screen. The company's annual revenue exceeded the GDP of small countries, their international operations spanning 6 continents, their influence reaching into sectors she hadn't even known existed. Marcus Richardson himself was featured regularly in Forbes and Fortune, photographed at charity galas and business summits with the casual confidence of someone born into a world where power was inherited like eye color. The deeper Maya dug into her research, the more incomprehensible her situation became. Richardson Industries didn't hire junior accountants off the street. Their human resources department required multiple interviews, extensive background checks, and references from previous employers who could vouch for both competence and character. The company's reputation for excellence meant they could afford to be selective, choosing from applicants with Ivy League degrees and years of relevant experience. Maya's community college transcript and employment gap felt increasingly inadequate as she read about the caliber of people who typically joined the Richardson team. Yet Jennifer Walsh had called Sunday afternoon, her professional tone warm but efficient as she confirmed Maya's Monday start date and provided detailed information about orientation procedures. The conversation had been surreal, Jennifer discussing salary details and benefit packages with the same matter-of-fact precision she probably used for all new hires, as if Maya's employment was the natural result of a standard interview process, rather than an impulsive decision made in a corporate lobby. The rideshare pulled up to Richardson Industries, and Maya felt her breath catch in her throat. The building looked even more imposing in the morning light, its glass facade reflecting the sky in a way that made it seem to disappear into the heavens above. Corporate warriors streamed through the revolving doors with the synchronized precision of a well-rehearsed ballet, their movements speaking of familiarity with environments where decisions were measured in millions and mistakes could destroy careers. Maya paid the driver and gathered her belongings, the simple act of standing on the sidewalk, feeling like crossing into foreign territory. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blue dress she'd bought for graduation 3 years ago, paired with the only professional shoes she owned. The ensemble was appropriate but clearly inexpensive, marking her as someone who didn't belong in a world where clothing served as a silent indicator of status and earning potential. The lobby felt different this time, transformed from a refuge into a workplace. Maya recognized the security guard who had been on duty Friday morning, a tall man with graying temples who nodded politely as she approached his desk. She explained her situation, expecting confusion or skepticism, but he simply consulted his computer screen and provided her with a temporary badge and directions to the Human Resources Department on the 15th floor. The elevator ride felt endless, each floor marking her ascent into a realm she'd only imagined from the outside. Through the glass walls, she could see open office spaces filled with people who moved with the confident efficiency of those who belonged exactly where they were. Their conversations carried the specialized vocabulary of corporate success, references to quarterly projections, and market analyses that required years of education and experience to fully understand. Human Resources occupied a corner of the 15th floor, its modern design somehow managing to be both welcoming and intimidating. The receptionist, a woman in her 30s with perfectly styled hair and a smile that suggested extensive customer service training, greeted Maya with professional warmth and directed her to a conference room where Jennifer Walsh was waiting. Jennifer looked exactly as Maya had imagined during their phone conversation, impeccably dressed and radiating the competent authority of someone who managed complex schedules and high-stakes communications without visible stress. Her handshake was firm, her manner friendly but businesslike, and her efficiency in handling the orientation process suggested she'd done this countless times before. "Welcome to Richardson Industries," Jennifer said, gesturing for Maya to take a seat at the polished conference table. "I hope your first day goes smoothly. Mr. Richardson asked me to personally ensure that your transition into the company is as seamless as possible. The mention of Marcus Richardson sent a flutter of nervousness through Maya's stomach. She'd replayed their Friday conversation dozens of times over the weekend, analyzing every word and gesture for clues about his motivations. The memory of his unexpected kindness felt increasingly dreamlike, especially in the harsh fluorescent light of corporate reality. She wondered if he'd already regretted his impulsive decision, if he'd spent the weekend questioning the wisdom of hiring someone based on a 5-minute interaction. Jennifer guided Maya through a comprehensive orientation process that covered everything from company policies to benefit enrollment. The health insurance package alone was more comprehensive than anything Maya had ever qualified for, including dental and vision coverage that would transform Sofia's access to healthcare. The childcare facility, located on the building's 3rd floor, offered educational programs and qualified staff at a fraction of what Maya would have paid for equivalent services in the city. The accounting department is on the 22nd floor, Jennifer explained as they reviewed Maya's job description. You'll be working primarily with Sarah Chen, our assistant controller, and her team. Sarah has been with the company for 8 years and has a reputation for being an excellent mentor to new employees. Maya nodded, trying to absorb the flood of information while managing her growing anxiety about meeting her new colleagues. She wondered what they'd been told about her hiring, whether they knew she'd been recruited under unusual circumstances. The accounting department at a company like Richardson Industries probably consisted of CPAs and finance professionals with advanced degrees and years of corporate experience. Her own qualifications felt increasingly modest in comparison. Mr. Richardson also wanted me to mention that he's arranged for you to have a private office rather than a cubicle, Jennifer continued, consulting her notes. He felt it would be more conducive to your productivity, especially given your need for occasional privacy for nursing. The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Maya off guard, suggesting that Marcus Richardson had given considerable thought to her specific needs rather than simply creating a generic position. The idea that he'd considered something as personal as her nursing schedule in his business planning felt both touching and slightly overwhelming. She wasn't accustomed to having her circumstances anticipated and accommodated by people in positions of power. After completing the paperwork, Jennifer escorted Maya to the childcare facility to register Sofia. The space was impressive, designed with the kind of attention to detail that suggested significant investment in employee satisfaction. Bright, cheerful rooms were equipped with age-appropriate toys and learning materials, while qualified staff members moved between children with the patient expertise of trained early childhood educators. Sofia, who had been unusually quiet during the morning's activities, seemed to come alive in the colorful environment. She reached toward a mobile hanging above the infant area, her eyes tracking the gentle movement with fascination. The childcare director, a woman named Patricia with 20 years of experience in early childhood development, took immediate interest in Sofia's alert demeanor and advanced motor skills. She's quite advanced for 6 months, Patricia observed as Sofia demonstrated her ability to sit up with minimal support. We'll make sure she's appropriately challenged as she grows. And of course, you're welcome to visit during your lunch break or whenever you need to check on her. Leaving Sofia in the capable hands of the childcare staff required more willpower than Maya had anticipated. The separation felt symbolic of the broader transformation happening in her life, a necessary step toward independence, but one that required trusting strangers with her most precious responsibility. Sofia seemed content in her new environment, but Maya's maternal instincts struggled with the transition from constant togetherness to structured separation. The 22nd floor buzzed with the focused energy of financial professionals managing complex portfolios and multinational transactions. Maya's arrival was met with polite curiosity, her new colleagues offering welcoming smiles while clearly wondering about the circumstances that had brought her to their department. She could sense the unspoken questions in their glances, the natural curiosity about someone who had joined their team without going through the usual hiring process. Sarah Chen proved to be exactly as Jennifer had described, a woman in her early 40s with an MBA from Northwestern and the kind of systematic approach to financial management that had earned her rapid promotion through the corporate ranks. Her office walls displayed certificates and awards that spoke of professional excellence, while her manner suggested someone who took mentorship seriously as both a responsibility and a privilege. "Welcome to the team," Sarah said, her smile genuine as she guided Maya to the office that would serve as her professional home. "I understand you have a background in accounting from community college. That's actually refreshing. We sometimes get so caught up in advanced theories that we forget the importance of solid fundamentals." Maya's office was modest but private, with a window that offered a view of the city skyline and enough space for both work materials and personal items. A computer workstation was already set up with her login credentials, and a small refrigerator in the corner had been stocked with bottles of water and healthy snacks. The thoughtfulness of the arrangements suggested someone had given careful consideration to her comfort and productivity. "Your primary responsibilities will include accounts receivable management, invoice processing, and monthly financial reporting," Sarah explained, handing Maya a detailed job description. "We'll start you with smaller accounts to help you get familiar with our systems, then gradually increase your responsibilities as you demonstrate competence." The work itself was challenging but manageable, requiring the kind of attention to detail and analytical thinking that had always come naturally to Maya. The company's accounting software was more sophisticated than anything she'd used in school, but the underlying principles were familiar. Sarah proved to be a patient teacher, answering questions without condescension and providing guidance that helped Maya navigate the learning curve. By lunchtime, Maya had processed her first batch of invoices and completed a reconciliation report that earned approving comments from Sarah's team. The work felt meaningful in a way that her previous jobs hadn't, connected to decisions and outcomes that had real impact on people's lives. Richardson Industries employed thousands of people whose livelihoods depended on the company's financial stability, and Maya found satisfaction in knowing her accuracy and diligence contributed to that. Security. The employee cafeteria occupied an entire floor, offering a variety of food options that rivaled upscale restaurants in both quality and presentation. Maya selected a simple salad and sandwich, conscious of her budget despite her improved salary, and found a table near the windows where she could eat while observing her new environment. The conversations around her revealed the diverse interests and backgrounds of Richardson Industries employees, from engineers discussing renewable energy projects to marketing specialists planning international campaigns. Halfway through her meal, Maya noticed a familiar figure entering the cafeteria. Marcus Richardson moved through the space with the same commanding presence she remembered from their first meeting, but his demeanor seemed more relaxed in this informal setting. He selected his lunch with the same systematic attention he probably applied to business decisions, then surveyed the room with eyes that seemed to catalog everything they encountered. Their gazes met across the crowded cafeteria, and Marcus offered a slight nod that acknowledged their connection without drawing unwanted attention. Maya felt her cheeks warm under his scrutiny, wondering if he was evaluating her integration into his company or simply being polite to a new employee. The distance between their worlds felt both vast and surprisingly permeable in that moment, separated by wealth and power, but connected by the unexpected bond they'd formed in the lobby 3 days earlier. Marcus didn't approach her table, respecting the professional boundaries that governed their workplace interaction, but his presence served as a reminder of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her here. Maya finished her lunch with renewed determination to prove herself worthy of the opportunity he'd provided, to demonstrate that his impulsive kindness had been an investment rather than a charitable gesture. The afternoon brought more complex challenges as Maya worked on reconciling discrepancies in a major client account. The errors required detective work, tracing transactions through multiple systems and identifying where communication breakdowns had led to billing mistakes. The process demanded both technical skill and logical reasoning, qualities that Maya had always possessed but had rarely been able to demonstrate in professional settings. Sarah observed Maya's methodical approach to problem-solving with growing appreciation, noting her new employee's ability to remain calm under pressure and think creatively about solutions. By the end of the day, Maya had identified the source of the discrepancies and proposed a system modification that would prevent similar problems in the future. Her suggestions demonstrated an understanding of both accounting principles and practical workflow that impressed her more experienced colleagues. "Excellent work for your first day," Sarah said, as Maya prepared to leave the office. "I can see why Mr. Richardson was confident in recommending you for this position." The comment confirmed Maya's suspicion that her hiring had been the subject of internal discussion, but Sarah's tone suggested approval rather than resentment. The accounting team seemed willing to judge her based on performance rather than the unusual circumstances of her recruitment, a fairness that Maya was determined to reward with consistently excellent work. Retrieving Sofia from the childcare facility provided a welcome reunion after their first day of separation. The baby seemed content and well cared for, her cheerful demeanor suggesting she'd adapted well to her new environment. Patricia provided a detailed report of Sofia's activities, including her interactions with other children and her response to various stimulation activities. "She's going to thrive here," Patricia assured Maya as they prepared Sofia for the journey home. "Some children struggle with transitions, but Sofia seems naturally adaptable. That's probably a reflection of her mother's resilience." The compliment touched Maya more deeply than Patricia probably realized. Validation that she was successfully navigating the challenges of single motherhood despite her youth and inexperience. Sofia's adaptability felt like a gift, one that would serve them both well as they adjusted to their dramatically improved circumstances. The rideshare home provided time for Maya to process the day's events, cradling Sofia while watching the city pass by outside the windows. Her first day at Richardson Industries had exceeded her cautiously optimistic expectations, revealing a company culture that valued competence and collaboration over credentials and connections. Her colleagues had welcomed her warmly, her supervisor had provided excellent guidance, and her work had been both challenging and meaningful. Yet beneath her satisfaction with the day's successes, Maya couldn't shake the awareness that her entire future remained dependent on the continued goodwill of Marcus Richardson. His decision to hire her had been impulsive, based more on instinct than evaluation, and she wondered how long she could maintain his confidence in her abilities. The pressure to prove herself worthy of his trust felt both motivating and overwhelming, a constant reminder that she was living a professional life she hadn't earned through traditional means. That evening, after feeding Sofia and putting her to bed in their small apartment, Maya sat at her kitchen table, reviewing her first day's work and planning for the challenges ahead. The contrast between her improved prospects and her unchanged living situation felt surreal, Success at a billion-dollar corporation, followed by ramen noodles for dinner in a studio apartment where the heat worked sporadically and the neighbors argued loudly enough to wake sleeping babies. But Maya had learned to find satisfaction in small victories and incremental progress. Her first paycheck would arrive in 2 weeks, followed by the gradual accumulation of financial security that would eventually transform Sofia's childhood from one of scarcity to one of opportunity. The apartment might be temporary, but the skills and experience Maya was gaining at Richardson Industries would serve as the foundation for a career that could provide genuine stability. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Maya's dreams were filled with spreadsheets and financial reports, the mundane details of professional life transformed into symbols of hope and possibility. Somewhere across the city, in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Marcus Richardson was also thinking about first days and new beginnings, wondering if his impulsive decision to help a struggling mother would prove to be one of the best business decisions he'd ever made. The following weeks established a routine that felt both familiar and miraculous to Maya. Her days began with careful preparation, choosing from her limited wardrobe of professional clothes, while Sofia babbled contentedly in her crib. The commute to Richardson Industries became a transition period, time to mentally prepare for the intellectual challenges and interpersonal dynamics that awaited her in the glass tower downtown. Maya's competence in her role became increasingly apparent as she tackled more complex assignments and demonstrated reliability under pressure. Sarah Chen began including her in departmental meetings where strategic decisions were discussed, recognizing that Maya's fresh perspective and methodical approach often revealed solutions that more experienced colleagues had overlooked. Her suggestions for improving efficiency and accuracy in routine processes earned praise from senior management and respect from her peers. The childcare arrangement continued to exceed Maya's expectations, with Sofia thriving under the attention of qualified caregivers and age-appropriate educational activities. The baby's social development accelerated in the stimulating environment, her interactions with other children teaching her lessons about sharing and cooperation that would serve her well throughout life. Maya's lunch visits became highlights of both their days, brief reunions that reinforced their bond while allowing Maya to observe Sofia's continued growth and adaptation. But it was the unexpected encounters with Marcus Richardson that added complexity to Maya's experience at the company. Their paths crossed occasionally in elevators, hallways, and common areas, brief interactions that were always professional but carried an undercurrent of mutual awareness. Marcus seemed to track her progress without interfering, his subtle inquiries about her adjustment suggesting continued interest in her success without crossing appropriate boundaries. During her third week at Richardson Industries, Maya discovered the true extent of Marcus's influence on her employment situation. Sarah Chen had mentioned casually that the private office Maya occupied had been specially arranged, that Marcus had personally requested modifications to accommodate her nursing needs. The revelation that he'd invested personal attention in details of her comfort and productivity felt both touching and slightly overwhelming. Mr. Richardson takes a personal interest in the success of all our employees, Sarah had explained when Maya expressed surprise at the level of accommodation. But I get the impression he's particularly invested in seeing you succeed here. The comment left Maya wondering about Marcus's motivations and expectations. She appreciated his support, but worried about the implications of being singled out for special attention. Her success at Richardson Industries needed to be based on merit rather than charity, earned through competence rather than granted through sympathy. The balance between gratitude and independence felt increasingly delicate as her professional relationships deepened. Maya's financial situation improved dramatically with her first full paycheck, the direct deposit appearing in her bank account. Like a small miracle, the amount was more than she'd ever earned in a month, enough to pay her rent and bills while still having money left over for savings and small luxuries she'd forgotten were possible. She treated herself to a decent dinner and bought Sofia a new outfit, simple pleasures that felt profound after months of careful budgeting and constant worry. But with financial security came new challenges and responsibilities. Maya began researching better housing options, neighborhoods where Sofia could grow up with access to good schools and safe playgrounds. The prospect of leaving their cramped studio apartment felt exciting, but also terrifying. Another major change in a life that had already undergone radical transformation. She wanted to make decisions carefully, avoiding the mistakes that had contributed to her previous struggles. Maya also began considering her long-term career goals, researching opportunities for professional development and continuing education. Richardson Industries offered tuition reimbursement for employees pursuing advanced degrees, and Maya wondered if she could eventually complete her bachelor's degree while working full-time. The company's commitment to employee growth suggested that her current position could serve as the foundation for a genuine career rather than just a temporary solution to financial problems. The complexity of her emotions about Marcus Richardson continued to evolve as their professional relationship developed. She respected his business acumen and appreciated his unexpected kindness, but she also felt the weight of obligation that came with being the recipient of life-changing generosity. Their occasional conversations revealed glimpses of intelligence and humor beneath his authoritative exterior, suggesting depths to his personality that weren't apparent in his public persona. Maya found herself curious about the man behind the corporate empire, wondering what had motivated his impulsive decision to help her and whether he ever questioned the wisdom of that choice. She'd researched his background extensively, learning about his parents' death and his early assumption of corporate responsibility. But the articles and interviews revealed little about his personal life or private thoughts. The Marcus Richardson who had offered her employment seemed different from the cold businessman described in business magazines, more human and vulnerable, despite his obvious power. Their interactions remained strictly professional, but Maya sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. There was assessment in his gaze, as if he were evaluating the success of his investment in her potential, but also something warmer that suggested personal interest in her well-being. The attention felt both flattering and unsettling, a reminder that her professional fate remained tied to his continued approval. As Maya approached her first month at Richardson Industries, she reflected on the profound changes that had transformed her life in such a short period. The woman who had sat in the corporate lobby, desperate enough to nurse her baby in a public space, felt like a different person. Someone from a past life marked by uncertainty and desperation. Her current reality, while not without challenges, was characterized by stability, respect, and the possibility of genuine achievement. Yet Maya remained acutely aware of how quickly circumstances could change, how dependent her security remained on factors beyond her control. Her employment at Richardson Industries was still too new to feel permanent, her relationship with Marcus Richardson too complex to navigate with complete confidence. She approached each day with determination to prove herself worthy of the opportunities she'd been given, while preparing for the possibility that those opportunities might someday be withdrawn. The future stretched ahead with promise and uncertainty. In equal measure, a landscape of potential achievements shadowed by the knowledge that her extraordinary second chance had come from a source as unpredictable as human kindness. Maya faced that future with the same courage that had carried her through months of struggle, armed now with hope, but tempered by the wisdom that came from understanding how precious and fragile good fortune could be. The first sign of trouble, came on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 weeks after Maya had begun working at Richardson Industries. She arrived at her office to find an email from corporate communications requesting her immediate presence in conference room A on the 35th floor. The message was terse, offering no explanation for the summons, but Maya's stomach clenched with familiar anxiety as she read the formal language that suggested something serious was developing. Conference room A was a space Maya had never entered before, reserved for high-level meetings and sensitive discussions that didn't involve junior employees. The room's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while the polished marble table and leather chairs spoke of decisions that affected thousands of lives and millions of dollars. When Maya entered, she found herself facing a tribunal of senior executives whose expressions ranged from curious to openly hostile. Victoria Sterling, the company's chief financial officer, sat at the head of the table like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face, and her steel gray suit seemed designed to intimidate rather than impress. Maya had seen Victoria's photograph in company newsletters and financial reports, but encountering her in person was like meeting a force of nature that had been temporarily contained in human form. "Miss Rodriguez," Victoria said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to instant obedience. "Please have a seat. We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your employment here." Maya's legs felt unsteady as she took the chair indicated, her mind racing through possible explanations for this confrontation. She'd been careful to perform her duties excellently, had received nothing but positive feedback from Sarah Chen and her colleagues, and had followed every company policy to the letter. The hostile atmosphere in the room suggested something far more serious than performance concerns, but Maya couldn't imagine what accusations might be leveled against her. "I'm not sure I understand," Maya said, fighting to keep her voice steady, despite the fear that was building in her chest. "Has there been a problem with my work?" Victoria consulted a folder in front of her, her movements deliberate and theatrical. "Your work performance isn't the issue, Miss Rodriguez. What concerns us is the irregular nature of your hiring and the questions it raises about potential favoritism and inappropriate relationships within our organization." The words hit Maya like physical blows, each syllable designed to wound and humiliate. She felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger as she realized the true nature of this meeting. Someone had decided that her employment represented a threat to the company's reputation, that her presence somehow tainted the pristine image Richardson Industries had cultivated over decades of careful corporate management. "I was hired based on my qualifications," Maya said, her voice stronger now as anger began to override fear. "I have an accounting degree and relevant experience, and I've performed every task assigned to me with competence and professionalism." Robert Harrison, the company's general counsel, leaned forward with the predatory interest of a lawyer sensing weakness. His expensive suit and perfectly styled hair couldn't disguise the calculating coldness in his eyes, the sort of man who viewed human problems as obstacles to be eliminated rather than challenges to be solved. "Miss Rodriguez," Robert said, his tone suggesting he was speaking to a child who needed complex concepts explained in simple terms, "no one is questioning your technical abilities. However, we've received information suggesting that your hiring bypassed normal procedures and may have involved personal relationships that could expose the company to legal liability." Maya's confusion must have shown on her face because Victoria Sterling smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully cornered their prey. She opened the folder and withdrew a series of photographs that she spread across the table, like evidence in a criminal trial. The images showed Maya and Marcus Richardson in various locations throughout the building, their interactions captured by security cameras and presented with sinister implications. These photographs document multiple private meetings between you and Mr. Richardson, Victoria explained, her voice dripping with false concern. Meetings that occurred outside normal business channels and without appropriate oversight. Can you explain the nature of these encounters? Maya stared at the photographs, recognizing scenes from her daily life at Richardson Industries that had been transformed into something sordid through selective editing and malicious interpretation. There was Marcus speaking to her in the elevator. Their conversation about quarterly reports twisted into evidence of inappropriate intimacy. Another image showed them passing in the hallway, his polite nod somehow rendered suspicious through the lens of predetermined suspicion. Those are normal workplace interactions, Maya said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. Mr. Richardson occasionally asks about my adjustment to the company, and I respond professionally. There's nothing inappropriate about any of those conversations. Victoria's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for a human mouth. Miss Rodriguez, surely you understand how these images might be interpreted by someone unfamiliar with your version of events. A young, attractive single mother having private meetings with the company's billionaire CEO raises obvious questions about the nature of their relationship. The implications were clear, and Maya felt nauseated by the ugliness of the accusations. Being leveled against her, these people were suggesting that she'd traded sexual favors for employment, that her position at Richardson Industries was the result of an affair rather than merit. The assumption was so far from the truth that Maya struggled to formulate a response that could adequately address the poisonous atmosphere they'd created. "That's disgusting," Maya said, her professional composure finally cracking under the weight of the insults. "I've never had an inappropriate relationship with Mr. Richardson or anyone else in this company. My hiring was based on my qualifications, and my continued employment is based on my performance." Robert Harrison shuffled through additional papers in his briefcase, his movements suggesting he had more ammunition to deploy in this character assassination. "Ms. Rodriguez, we've also discovered some interesting facts about your background that weren't disclosed during your hiring process. Did you fail to mention that you'd previously been terminated from employment for attendance issues?" Maya's heart sank as she realized how thoroughly they'd investigated her past, digging up every mistake and setback to use as weapons against her. The job she'd lost during pregnancy had indeed involved attendance problems, though the real reason had been her employer's unwillingness to accommodate her medical needs. The truth was more complex than Robert's simplified accusation, but Maya knew that nuance would be lost in this hostile environment. "I was terminated because my employer didn't want to provide maternity leave," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They used attendance as an excuse to avoid their legal obligations." Victoria Sterling leaned back in her chair, her expression suggesting she'd heard exactly what she'd expected to hear. "So you admit to having employment problems in the past, and now you're claiming that your current position, obtained through highly irregular means, is completely legitimate. I'm sure you can understand why that might be difficult for us to believe." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, each question designed to humiliate and intimidate rather than seek truth or understanding. Maya answered as honestly as she could, but every response was twisted into further evidence of wrongdoing or deception. The executives had clearly decided her guilt before she'd entered the room, and no amount of explanation or defense would change their predetermined conclusion. Finally, Victoria Sterling delivered the verdict that Maya had been dreading since the meeting began. "Miss Rodriguez, while we have no definitive proof of impropriety, the concerns raised about your employment require us to take protective action. Effective immediately, you'll be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding your hiring." The words felt like a death sentence, the destruction of everything Maya had worked to build over the past 6 weeks. Administrative leave was corporate speak for suspension, a way of removing her from the building without technically firing her. The investigation, they promised, would be designed to find wrongdoing rather than exonerate her, and Maya knew that her employment at Richardson Industries was effectively over. "What about my daughter?" Maya asked, desperation breaking through, her attempts to maintain dignity. "She's enrolled in the company childcare program. If I'm not working here, I can't afford alternative arrangements." Victoria's expression didn't change. Her indifference to Maya's personal circumstances, as chilling as her accusations had been. "The childcare program is available only to active employees. You'll need to make alternative arrangements for your daughter immediately." Maya left the conference room in a daze, her legs moving automatically while her mind struggled to process the magnitude of what had just happened. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a desperate single mother with no prospects and no hope. Marcus Richardson's kindness had transformed her life, providing security and opportunity she'd never dared imagine. Now, in the span of a single meeting, that transformation had been violently reversed by people who viewed her as a threat to their corporate order. The administrative leave meant Maya couldn't return to her office to collect personal belongings or say goodbye to colleagues who had become friends. Security would pack her desk and mail her items, a humiliating process that marked her as someone who couldn't be trusted with company property. Sarah Chen and the accounting team would learn of her departure through official channels, probably accompanied by carefully worded explanations that suggested wrongdoing without providing specifics. Maya's first priority was retrieving Sofia from the childcare facility before word of her suspension reached the staff there. She couldn't bear the thought of her daughter being caught in the middle of this corporate assassination, subjected to the confused stares and whispered conversations that would inevitably follow news of Maya's disgrace. Sofia had thrived in the stimulating environment of Richardson Industries' childcare program, and losing access to those resources felt like another punishment for crimes Maya hadn't committed. Patricia, the childcare director, seemed genuinely confused and concerned when Maya explained that Sofia would be leaving the program immediately. The older woman had grown fond of both mother and daughter, and her disappointment at their sudden departure was evident in her careful questions about Maya's plans and Sofia's future care arrangements. "I'm sorry to see you go," Patricia said, as she helped Maya gather Sofia's belongings. "Sofia was one of our brightest children, and you were clearly a devoted mother. I hope whatever changes you're making work out well for both of you." Maya accepted the kindness gratefully, knowing it might be the last professional courtesy she received from anyone associated with Richardson Industries. Her reputation within the company would be destroyed by the investigation, her name associated with scandal and inappropriate behavior regardless of the truth. Future employers would see the termination from a prestigious corporation and draw their own conclusions about her character and reliability. The journey home felt like a funeral procession, Maya holding Sofia close while the city passed by outside the rideshare windows. 6 weeks earlier, the same route had represented hope and possibility. The daily commute to a job that promised to transform their lives. Now it marked the end of a dream that had been too good to be true from the beginning. Another reminder that good fortune could be snatched away as quickly as it had been granted. Maya's apartment seemed smaller and shabbier than she remembered, the contrast with her former office highlighting how far she'd fallen in a single morning. The bills stacked on her kitchen table reminded her of financial realities she'd temporarily escaped, obligations that would soon become impossible to meet without her Richardson Industries salary. The security deposit and first month's rent she'd saved for a better apartment now represented her entire buffer against poverty and homelessness. That evening, after Sofia had fallen asleep, Maya sat at her laptop researching unemployment benefits and job search strategies. The employment market for junior accountants was competitive, and her sudden departure from Richardson Industries would raise questions she'd struggle to answer honestly. Potential employers would want to know why she'd left such a prestigious position so quickly, and Maya couldn't explain the truth without seeming to blame her former employer or appear involved in workplace drama. The investigation Victoria Sterling had promised would likely drag on for weeks or months, keeping Maya in professional limbo while systematically destroying any chance of vindication or return. Corporate investigations were designed to protect the company rather than discover truth, and Maya knew that her version of events would carry little weight against the predetermined narrative of wrongdoing and deception. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Chen, who had somehow learned of Maya's departure despite the confidentiality supposedly surrounding personnel matters. The message was brief but supportive, expressing confusion about Maya's sudden absence and offering to serve as a reference for future job applications. The kindness was touching, but Maya wondered how long Sarah's support would last once the official narrative of Maya's misconduct spread throughout the accounting department. Sleep proved elusive as Maya's mind raced through possible explanations for the morning's attack on her employment and reputation. Someone had clearly orchestrated the investigation, gathering evidence and building a case designed to force her out of Richardson Industries. The question was, who had targeted her and why? What threat she posed that justified such a systematic campaign of character assassination? The most obvious suspect was someone who resented her rapid hiring and unusual relationship with Marcus Richardson. Corporate environments bred jealousy and competition, and Maya's success, despite her unconventional background, had probably generated resentment among colleagues who felt their own achievements had been overlooked. The attack felt personal, rather than procedural, motivated by malice rather than legitimate business concerns. But Maya also wondered whether her departure served larger political purposes within Richardson Industries. Victoria Sterling and Robert Harrison had conducted the meeting with the efficiency of people executing a predetermined plan, their questions designed to humiliate rather than investigate. Perhaps her employment had become a liability in some corporate power struggle she didn't understand, her relationship with Marcus Richardson making her a convenient target for his enemies within the company. The next few days passed in a blur of job applications and childcare arrangements as Maya tried to rebuild her life around the sudden loss of income and security. Her savings would last perhaps 2 months if she was careful, but finding new employment would take time she might not have. The gap in her resume would require explanation, and Maya struggled to craft a narrative that acknowledged her departure from Richardson Industries without admitting to the accusations that had led to her suspension. Sofia seemed to sense her mother's distress, becoming fussy and demanding in ways that strained Maya's patience and emotional resources. The baby had grown accustomed to the stimulating environment and professional care provided by Richardson Industries' childcare facility, and the transition back to full-time motherhood in their cramped apartment was difficult for both of them. Maya felt guilty for disrupting Sofia's routine and development, another consequence of her failed attempt to build a better life. The official notification of Maya's termination arrived by certified mail on Friday afternoon, a legal document that made her suspension permanent and final. The letter cited irregularities in hiring procedures and concerns about professional conduct as justification for her dismissal, language carefully crafted to suggest wrongdoing without making specific accusations that might expose the company to legal challenge. Maya read the termination letter multiple times, searching for loopholes or opportunities for appeal. But the document had been prepared by expert lawyers who understood how to destroy careers while avoiding liability. Her employment at Richardson Industries was over, and any attempt to fight the decision would require legal resources she couldn't afford and energy she needed to direct toward finding new work and caring for Sofia. The irony wasn't lost on Maya, that she was now in worse shape than she'd been before Marcus Richardson offered her employment 6 weeks earlier. Then she'd been poor, but hopeful, struggling, but not disgraced. Now she carried the stigma of professional misconduct, a scarlet letter that would follow her to every job interview and reference check. Her brief taste of security and success had come at the cost of destroying her reputation and future prospects. Maya's research into employment law revealed the hopelessness of her situation. Richardson Industries had been careful to avoid specific accusations that might constitute defamation, instead relying on implications and suggestions that were nearly impossible to challenge legally. Fighting the termination would require proving that the company had acted in bad faith, a burden of proof that favored corporate defendants with unlimited legal resources. By the end of her first week of unemployment, Maya had submitted applications to dozens of potential employers and received rejections from the few who bothered to respond promptly. Her association with Richardson Industries should have been an asset, but the circumstances of her departure had transformed it into a liability that overshadowed her qualifications and experience. The accounting profession was small enough that news of professional misconduct traveled quickly, and Maya suspected that her reputation had been poisoned throughout the local business community. The weekend brought a surprise that felt like salt in Maya's wounds. While researching her former employer online, she discovered a press release announcing Richardson Industries' commitment to ethical hiring practices and workplace integrity. The document made no specific mention of Maya's case, but the timing suggested it was part of the company's effort to control the narrative around her departure and demonstrate their commitment to appropriate professional standards. Maya found herself wondering whether Marcus Richardson knew about her termination, whether he'd been consulted or informed about the investigation that had destroyed her career. Part of her hoped he'd been kept ignorant of the proceedings, that his trust in her remained intact, even if his company had decided she was a liability. But another part of her suspected that he'd approved or even ordered her removal, that his initial kindness had been replaced by corporate calculation when her presence became inconvenient. The thought that Marcus might have betrayed her trust felt worse than the financial hardship or professional humiliation she was enduring. His decision to help her had seemed genuine, motivated by human compassion rather than calculated advantage. If he'd participated in her destruction, it would mean that her judgment of his character had been fundamentally flawed, that she'd trusted someone who viewed her as disposable when circumstances changed. Monday morning arrived with the cruel reminder that Maya no longer had anywhere to go, no purpose beyond caring for Sofia and searching for employment that seemed increasingly unlikely to materialize. She dressed professionally anyway, maintaining the routines that had structured her life during her brief time at Richardson Industries. The familiar motions of preparing for work felt like muscle memory from a past life, habits that belonged to a woman who'd had hope and prospects and a future worth planning for. Maya's phone rang as she was updating her resume, the caller ID showing a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously, expecting another rejection from a potential employer or perhaps a debt collector who'd learned of her changed circumstances. Instead, she heard a voice that made her heart race with a mixture of hope and terror. "Miss Rodriguez, this is Jennifer Walsh from Richardson Industries. Mr. Richardson would like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss your recent departure from the company. Would you be available at 2 o'clock? The request felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, but Maya's experience with corporate meetings had taught her to be suspicious of unexpected invitations. Victoria Sterling's ambush had begun with a similar summons to an important conference room, and Maya wondered whether this was another trap designed to complete her professional destruction. But the possibility that Marcus Richardson wanted to hear her side of the story, that he might offer some form of assistance or vindication, was too important to ignore. "Yes," Maya said, her voice barely steady. "I'll be there at 2 o'clock. As she prepared for what might be her final encounter with the man who had briefly transformed her life, Maya felt the familiar mixture of hope and fear that had characterized every significant moment since their first meeting in the corporate lobby. This meeting would either restore some measure of justice to her situation or provide final confirmation that her faith in human kindness had been tragically misplaced. The afternoon stretched ahead like a bridge between her current desperation and some unknown future, carrying the possibility of redemption or the certainty of final defeat. Maya gathered her courage and her dignity, preparing to face whatever truth awaited her in the glass tower where her dreams had been both born and destroyed. Maya walked into Marcus Richardson's office with Sofia in her arms, her heart pounding as she faced the man whose kindness had transformed her life before corporate politics destroyed it. Marcus stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette dark against the afternoon skyline, and when he turned to face her, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Raw anger. "Sit down, please," Marcus said, his voice controlled but trembling with barely contained fury. "I need to apologize, and then I need to make this right." Maya remained standing, clutching Sofia protectively. "You knew about the investigation." "I knew nothing until this morning," Marcus replied, his jaw tight. "Victoria Sterling conducted her witch hunt behind my back, thinking she was protecting the company from scandal. She forgot that I still own this company." He moved to his desk and withdrew a thick folder spreading documents across the polished surface. "I've spent the last 3 days reviewing every detail of their so-called investigation. Security footage, taken out of context, employment records twisted to suggest impropriety, witness statements from people who never even spoke to you. It was character assassination, pure and simple." Maya felt tears threatening as the weight of vindication mixed with the pain of what she'd endured. "Why did they do this to me?" Marcus's expression darkened further. "Because Victoria saw you as a threat to her vision of corporate purity. A single mother hired outside normal channels challenged her sense of order. She decided to eliminate what she perceived as a problem. Consequences be damned." He pressed a button on his desk, and moments later, Jennifer Walsh entered with a legal document. "Miss Rodriguez, effective immediately, you're reinstated to your position with full back pay and a promotion to senior accountant. Victoria Sterling and Robert Harrison have been terminated for conducting unauthorized investigations and violating company policies regarding employee rights." Maya stared at the paperwork, struggling to process the sudden reversal of her fortunes. "You fired them? I don't tolerate people who destroy innocent lives for their own agenda," Marcus said firmly. "This company was built on principles of fairness and integrity. What they did to you violated everything we stand for." Sofia gurgled contentedly in Maya's arms, oblivious to the momentous conversation happening around her. Marcus's expression softened as he looked at the baby, then back at Maya with something deeper than professional concern. "There's something else," Marcus continued, his voice gentler now. "I've established a new foundation, the Richardson Family Support Initiative. It provides scholarships, childcare assistance, and career development for single parents trying to build better lives for their children. I'd like you to consider serving as its director." Maya's breath caught. "Director? You understand the challenges these families face better than anyone," Marcus explained. "Your experience, both the struggles and the triumph, makes you uniquely qualified to help others navigate similar paths. The position comes with a substantial salary increase and the resources to make a real difference in people's lives. Maya looked down at Sofia, then back at Marcus, seeing him clearly for the first time, not just as a billionaire CEO, but as a man who had learned something about compassion and justice through their unlikely connection. "Why are you doing all this?" Marcus stepped closer, his professional mask finally falling away completely. "Because 6 weeks ago, a brave young mother taught me that real strength isn't about power or money. It's about fighting for what's right, even when the odds are against you. You changed my perspective on everything that matters." He paused, vulnerability replacing authority in his voice. "And because I've fallen in love with that strength, with your courage, with the way you've never stopped believing in a better future for your daughter despite everything you've faced." Maya felt her world shift once again, but this time towards something beautiful rather than terrifying. "Marcus, I know the timing is complicated," he said quickly. "I know there are professional considerations and power dynamics to navigate, but I also know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with business and everything to do with the extraordinary woman you are." Sofia reached out toward Marcus with tiny fingers, and he gently took her hand, the gesture natural and tender. "I'd like the chance to be part of both your lives if you'll have me, not as your employer, but as someone who loves you and wants to build a future together." Maya looked into his eyes and saw the same hope and vulnerability she'd felt that first day in the lobby. The journey from desperation to love had been unexpected and painful, but it had led them both to this moment of possibility. "Yes," Maya whispered, then stronger. "Yes, to all of it." Marcus stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both. Maya and Sofia, creating a circle of protection and promise that felt like coming home. Through the window, the city stretched out below them, full of other stories waiting to unfold, other lives that could be transformed by unexpected kindness, and the courage to believe in second chances. 3 years later, Maya stood in the same conference room where Victoria Sterling had tried to destroy her, but now she was addressing a group of Foundation Scholarship recipients. Behind her, a banner read, "Richardson Family Support Initiative." And beside her sat Marcus, now her husband, holding their 18-month-old son, while Sofia played quietly nearby. "Sometimes," Maya told the assembled single parents, "the help you need comes from the most unexpected places, but it's not really about the help itself. It's about what you do with the opportunity when it arrives. Each of you has the strength to transform not just your own life, but the lives of your children and everyone you'll touch along the way." In the audience, a young father clutched his acceptance letter with tears in his eyes, just as Maya had once clutched Sofia in that marble lobby, hoping for a miracle. The circle of compassion continued, rippling outward through lives that would be forever changed by the simple recognition that everyone deserves a chance to build something better. Marcus squeezed Maya's hand as she concluded her speech, their eyes meeting with the shared understanding that love multiplied becomes a force capable of changing the world, one family at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.